So welcome all to the SPE Skill System Design session. Today we are going to do a mock interview. Sreeprasd would be the interviewer and Hetal would be the candidate. They would go through another few minutes, like 40-45 minutes designing a system. And after that, anybody is welcome to give them feedback. So with this, to Sreeprasd and Hetal.
Yeah, so I can give my introduction. Hi everyone, my name is Hetal. I've been working as an SDE in Amazon for past 4 years. Recently, I've started looking for a change, and that's why I'm here. I think this is my first mock interview, first mock system design interview. So yeah, looking forward to this.
Hi, my name is Sreeprasd. I'm working as an engineer in SF. That's it. I pasted the question on the chat, Zoom chat.
Okay. Uh, okay, I'm just going to paste it in draw.io so that
Sure.
I can refer to it. Got it. So we are looking at designing a system that monitors metrics on distributed system. Sreeprasd, could you give me some context on how this system will be used so I can understand the use cases better?
Sure, absolutely. So what we're designing here is a system that monitors metrics on a distributed system. Metrics could be like CPU, memory, connections to a message broker, or number of unhacked messages in a messaging queue, etc. What we are designing is just the part where we ingest and then somehow alert the user. Or here a user is an internal group of users. So you probably should be able to accept some parameters for the metrics and the threshold range. Max, something min, and some internal group where you want the alerts to be gone to. You don't need to design the alert parts of the metric system, and do not confuse this with logging, because this is not logging. It's just monitoring metrics on a system. We're not looking at designing a logging system. Assume that, or not assume, design the part where you can send metrics or somehow get the metrics from this system, and then save it somewhere so that we can do analytics and things later. But the analytics and things would be more likely to be done on live data. So somehow you should be able to provide live data to the user.
Okay. Okay, so the first requirement would be user should be able to define a metric.
Correct. A metric,
so
like some metric, some range, and then some user group. That's what I'm expecting, like somebody who will be using the system would be using it for.
Right, so like define a metric, that would mean define the data that we are going to observe. So I would just say like metric that we are supposed to monitor, then the threshold, if it goes beyond that, we need to alarm on that, right? And then maybe some email ID that will use to notify the user if the metric crosses the threshold.
Yeah, when you say crosses the threshold, just to be clear, if it goes below a threshold also, not just crosses a threshold over. So
I see. So we sorry, go ahead.
Max and a min.
Okay, so the threshold will be max and min and max, and if it is not between this range, we want to alert the users.
Correct.
Got it. So user should be able to define a metric. Do we also want to support the functionality of deleting a metric?
Nope.
Okay, I would take that as a yes.
I said like, do not worry about deleting the metric.
Okay,
Keep that aside. Assume that the metrics is available for like 5 years.
okay, got it. So the another requirement is notifying. Okay, I'm just trying to think through what else can be done with the system.
Something you might want to think about is like the clients are not external users. These are like internal metrics. So your clients would be your internal systems.
Got it. Is there any other expectation from the client side that I'm missing here?
Not that I can think of.
Okay, got it. So about the metric, I'm making an assumption that it would be a numeric value that we will be tracking.
Sure, you can. That's a fair assumption to make.
Sreeprasad, if you said something, I couldn't hear you.
I think I was on mute. Yes, that's a fair assumption to make.
Okay. I'm also just going to create a section for assumptions so that I can keep track of it while designing.
Sure.
So on the technical requirements, what is the load on the system that I should expect?
Assume that you are getting around
Me.
100K requests per second.
Can you repeat that? Sorry, how many requests per second?
100K.
Requests per second. Is it fair to assume that users will be will users be using our system to just to get the status of the metrics, or are they not interested in that?
What do you mean status of the metrics?
Like as a user, if I created a metric and if I just want to see if how the metric is doing, it's not necessarily like outside of the threshold, but I just still want to monitor the metric. Would that be a requirement?
Sure.
Got it. So let me add it here. So is it fair to assume that like this is a read heavy system, saying that a viewing user would be users would use our system more to view a metric rather than create a new metric?
Yes.
Or is that some, okay. So this is a read heavy system. And in terms of number of matrix, can you give me just a rough number on how many metrics we expect our system to handle, maybe in a day or in a second?
I can give you the number of metrics that the user wants to create. Maybe we can go with like 5 right now, but it can increase. Like as and when new systems get added, this will increase. It's not
Got
a
it.
value of 5 forever. So I'm telling this 5, assuming that it's a small system, but this will scale up.
Got it. And how many users would we expect for our system? Maybe like some number of users per month.
Some number. So when
May
you say users, as in the, are you saying the clients? Clients are internal applications.
clients.
So yeah, the clients are internal applications which send metrics to the system that you're designing, and some other person will be getting the values from the system and then using it for analytical purposes.
Got it. So can we like assume there are 100 clients per day that would be using our system?
Sure.
So with 100 clients per, okay, got it. And we have 100K requests per second. Another thing I wanted to discuss with you is like availability of the system. So I'm assuming it should be highly available.
It should.
In terms of latency, is it fair to assume that we want the latency to be as low as possible, like as soon as the threshold is
Yeah.
outside the range we
Yeah, near real time should be fine.
got it? And since we are talking about distributed system and we want to make it highly available, we would want to store the data on multiple nodes. So in terms of consistency, if we want a low latency, we might have to go with eventual consistency. Is that fine?
When you say I want to see the data, I mean, it's up to you how to design it. When a metric comes and it's beyond the threshold or within that range of min and max, it's fine. But otherwise, an alert should be sent, and that should be almost immediately near real time.
Right. Got it. Yeah, we can go with low latency and probably we can discuss this more in detail when we discuss the components in more detail. But right now I'm thinking we can just go with the eventual consistency and see how that works for our design.
Okay.
Got it. So in assumptions, like one more thing that you mentioned, that we will assume that the notification system is available, so we'll not spend time on designing that.
Correct. Please don't spend time on notification system.
Got it. Okay, so next I'm thinking we can start with a high-level architecture diagram and discuss how some of the operation works, and then maybe we can go into designing how the APIs will look. Does that sound good to you?
Absolutely.
Cool. So let's have our client, and so, and our client will be some of the internal clients. One question I had was, what kind of interface will our clients be using to interact with our system? Will it be a website, or could it be like multiple devices?
It's up to you to design it. Somehow this client needs to send data to the server. So however way you want to design it, it should be fine. But as soon as the clients send the data, the server should get it. So up to you how to design it.
Okay, got it. I'm just, for the sake of simplicity right now, I'm assuming there will be only one type of client, like a web browser.
So the web browser will be sending the metrics to the internal application.
So I mean, like for defining a metric, right? We can provide one endpoint in the web browser, and user can use that to
Oh, okay.
like create a new metric
Okay. Oh, this is just the
and
admin.
view that.
Oh, this is the admin where you want to allow users to create a metric threshold and email ID.
Right.
Okay, yeah, sure, that's what, yeah.
Got it. Okay, so I'm just creating some high-level components, and maybe we can refine them more when we go forward. So we can just have one web server. This server can take a request from the clients for like creating or viewing a metric.
Okay.
And we can first use, and the web server will be interacting with a database. So this database will contain all the data about the metric, its configuration, and yeah, thing. One more thing is it okay to assume that our system will like, we don't need to go into the user management part right now?
No,
Got
this is totally fine. You have an actor who creates a metrics through this interface. And this
Got it.
DB storing for what? The metrics threshold and email ID?
Yeah. So we can talk about that. So first table it will have is matrix. So we can have one field called metric ID. Can have this as a primary key. Another thing is it will have a user name which will be unique across our system, so that we can find like who is the owner of this metric. Then the actual metric part, which will be a number which we will monitor. Then the threshold part, which will be, we can say, like a tuple of min and max number. Another is the email ID, like to whom we will send a notification ID, or it could also be a list of email ID we can, so that we can send notification to multiple people.
So here the username is what?
Username will be like a user ID that will be unique to our system. So like if this admin creates, every user will have a unique user ID, so that we can find who is the owner of the metric. Is that something
Okay.
we don't want?
No, that's fine. I got confused with why is a metric a number?
Oh, I thought like we made that assumption that it will be a numeric value.
It will be a
Right.
numeric value, but when I say, hey, I want to register for CPU usage to
Got
the
it.
web server, like I thought the metric would be that CPU usage. The
Uh,
value will be a number, and that is value that we are tracking. But shouldn't the I don't know whether you have another thing in mind. That's what I'm calling you
uh,
for.
yeah. So by number, I meant like maybe I could use it as a double. Is that what you mean?
No,
That would
say
be
for
more.
example, if I come and I say I want to register a metric for CPU usage, can you tell me
Mhm.
like what this metrics table would look like?
Right. So maybe if you want to see, oh, are you saying like it could also be a percentage? So for example, CPU
No, no.
usage, if I want to
Hold
get
on.
notified. Yeah.
Hold on. The way I was thinking is, you would like there is nowhere I'm seeing like a name called CPU threshold or CPU anywhere in this metrics table. All I'm seeing is a metric ID, a username, and a metric, which I'm assuming is the CPU that you are measuring. But if somebody wants to use this data, what
Mhm.
should they query for? Should they query for the ID?
Oh, got it. So you're saying, so a matrix could be of multiple types. It could be memory usage. It could be CPU.
There should be a metric name is what I'm trying to say. Somewhere there should be a metric name. I don't see that metric name somewhere. To later on to identify what this metric is, shouldn't there be a name?
Yeah, got it. So yeah, I was kind of thinking that we could have a metric as an object, and it would contain like it could further down the line it would contain metric name and description. But yeah, I think what you suggest makes things simpler.
Okay,
So
when you say double, so that's not an object, right? So that's why I thought like um,
oh
you have
yeah, right.
in other in mind. That's why I want to make sure that when I query, what would I query for?
Got it. Yeah, that's fair point. Yeah. So yeah, this will be double. This will be a string,
Okay,
or I would rather say it's a metric type,
sure.
and we can have kind of, I don't know, maybe enum that would have different kind of matrix type like CPU or like memory or latency.
Sure, a valid enum type. That's fine. Let's move on.
Yeah. And just to clarify, this will also be, it could also be a double number. Yeah, so apart from this, like there will also be a user table, and that would contain a list of metrics that a user own, but I don't think we're interested in that, so I'll skip that part.
Nope, that's fine.
Yeah, so this is a very like simple design right now. So like first thing is user comes in to the system, and they, let's say, first create. Let me define how some of the APIs will work so we can discuss this through. So create metric, user will pass a user ID. The metric name.
Uh, Let me a little bit more be clear. This one I
Mhm.
understand how you are going to use it. It's a CRUD operation. You're going to create a metric, and it's going to be saved here. It's fine with the APIs. Um, let's move on to the
Okay,
design of the actual metrics ingestion and storing part.
got it.
I want to give you
Yeah,
time.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, before going to that, I was thinking we can also refine this design a little bit, since we want to work in a distributed manner. Is that okay if I add more components here and then we
Sure,
go
sure.
towards?
How it is comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah. So so since this is a design distributed system, and we want our system to be highly available, having just a single web server will be a single point of failure. So rather than relying on just one server, we can have multiple servers who take requests from the user.
Mhm.
And we can also have a load balancer here, so that if we have to remove or add new server, the client does not need to know about that. The load balancer can take care of that, and also where to route each request.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm just drawing two, but we can assume that there are multiple web servers here.
Mhm.
And then these web servers will also be both will be talking to a DB. Also, like avoiding us having a single DB can cause like failure. So we can have like two DB. One would be let's say a primary DB that would serve all the request.
Mhm.
But in case it is down, we can start routing our request to the secondary DB.
Mhm.
And maybe we can also have a load balancer here in between, so that we know which that takes care of checking health of all the databases, and routes the request to the respective DB accordingly.
Okay.
Okay, so at least right now we have eliminated some single point of failures that we had in our design. Um, and then like, yeah, there will also be responses back to the client from here. similarly here as well. Um, yeah, so yeah, do you want to discuss anything here, or do you want to move to the storage part as you mentioned?
Not the storage part, but I would like to know how you are ingesting the data from different clients and how you are storing it and um, alerting.
Got it. Yeah, so right now, let's say if user created a matrix, the web server will update the DB with the newly created metric. And then we also kind of need to keep monitoring all the databases, like all the metrics continuously, so that we know if whenever the threshold is being breached, right? So since we have like 100K requests per second, and since it is a read heavy system, is it fair to assume that the web server will always already be loaded with creating and the viewing part of the matrix?
So two things to clarify. One is that these web servers will be hit by internal clients. Clients are internal applications, and they're going to be hit
Right.
with data like 100K requests per second. And so this is the way you are ingesting the data. Another set of people will be doing analysis on this data. In addition to whatever metrics threshold, that if it goes beyond or less, then alerts should be sent. So it should be both like accepting data read and write, and also allowing users to read from that almost near real time, but near real time. So it's both read and write, I would say, heavy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So, like the reason I was asking is I wanted to make a decision whether we should have a separate service that keeps monitoring the matrix from the DB on periodical manner to see if the threshold is breached or not.
It's up to you.
The re
It's up to you
Okay,
to design it. Yeah, it's up to you to design it, however way you are comfortable.
got it. So I would go with having a separate service for that, since we need to keep checking it periodically, and we don't want to like we still want our system to be available for creating a new metric and viewing part of it.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's call this monitoring service. This service will also interact with the this DB load balancer, and so right now we have uh, a table where each matrix and its configuration and values are defined. So, okay, I'm just thinking loud how it will work. So the monitoring system will periodically scan whole DB and check if if any metric value is outside this threshold or not. Um,
Okay. Did you want to discuss like how the data is entering into the DB?
No, I'm just thinking out loud that how would this monitoring service would know
Okay.
that if any metric is breaching a threshold, right? It has to continuously monitor all the metrics.
Sure.
So for that, it needs to scan the whole DB. Let's say our monitoring service keeps checking all the metrics every minute. Then scanning the whole table every minute might not be scalable, right? So for that, so our internal clients one is the admin and one is the application that will continuously keep sending us matrix, right? So if there is any change in the matrix value, so let's say if we have a system, like we have an internal application that has the memory sorry, not this, the memory in usage has increased for this particular application, and I'm assuming this application will also keep sending matrix to our system periodically.
So it is responsibility for the application to send metrics to the web server periodically.
Yeah, so there would be so our clients will be owning this application, and this application, like if it is running on some servers and we want to monitor memory usage, it needs to emit that periodically, right?
I mean, it's your design, so that's why I'm asking. Like, it is totally fine for the application to emit metrics, but that is the design where applications is responsible for emitting metrics to the load balancer. What happens if the application goes down or something?
Right. Yeah, that's a fair point. So we could have our monitoring metrics also interact with all the application and get all the data,
So,
assuming we have permission to do so.
so, so application will send data to the load balancer. It will emit data to the load balancer, and monitoring system will also look at the health of application.
No, no. So since you said like if application is down, in that case, we would not know the application is down, right? Our monitoring services will not get that. So I'm canceling out my previous thought, and I'm suggesting that rather than application sending us data, we can have our service periodically checking the application for all the metrics, assuming we have access to do so.
Okay, if a new application spins up, how does the monitoring service know that such a system exists?
Yeah, that's a good point. And so if we were to do this, we also need some data about all the applications that are registered with us, and we also need all the metrics for that particular application. So if we are going to in this direction to implement this, then we also need another table for applications.
Okay.
So there will be application table, and each metric has to be tied to like an application ID. So we can have another table application where we'll have an application ID and list of matrix that application has. So we can do the mapping.
So,
So in this,
so
sorry, go ahead.
who populates this application table?
So this will be populated at the time where the user creates some matrix.
Yeah, but it's a distributed system, right? Like, if I, like, for example, if I say CPU usage, and if I say I want to have a CPU usage metric, and right now I have to put like all the services that I have to monitor, and if tomorrow a new service come, then I am responsible for adding or updating the application table.
Right. Yeah. So that in our current design, that would be on the users to add a new application to our service so that we can monitor metrics in the new service as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were talking about the monitoring service. So monitoring service could have could read the database for all the list of application it has to monitor and the matrix for each respective application, and then it can periodically connect with the application, get all the data, and see if any new data is breaching the threshold. If it is breaching a threshold, then we can add another the notification systems that we have assumed that uh,
It
is
exists.
available.
Yeah, it is existing.
Yeah,
The other question I have is this monitoring system is a system which monitors like all the applications in our server.
right.
Is that a scalable design?
No, so not having just a single instance of application, we would have to have multiple monitoring service instances so that the load is distributed between them. Uh, yeah, that's one thinking that I have. So Yeah, so we can distribute the load among this monitoring service based on maybe applications. Uh, so for example, not this, if we have another application 2, so we can have some distribution mechanism. Maybe it's like based on application ID, or maybe we can just hash the application ID and assign like which monitoring service instance will be monitoring which application, so that the load is distributed between them.
Who decides this? Like which application instance is looking by which monitoring system?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good question. So for that, we can have either a separate service that designs, or we can have a web server. At the time when the matrix is created, we can have a web server decide based on a hash of the application ID, and we also need kind of another table to persist that information, that which application would be like which monitoring service instance would be monitoring which application. That would be one way. Let me just write it down so it's easier. So one is having the web server decide this.
When you say web server, like which web server is this? Is this the one that's after the load balancer? Is that the one that is determining?
Yeah, right.
But
So
how does it know?
so at the time of matrix creation, right, we would know which application this matrix is like need to monitor for. So based on the application ID, and like just we can have a hash of application ID, and then based on this hash, we can assign the hash range to like particular service instance of the monitoring, and then we can define that mapping accordingly. That is one way. I'm not proposing this, I'm just thinking out loud that this
Sure.
could be one way.
Okay.
But one one con that I see with this design is that like for example, if one of the matrix service instance is down, and web server would not know that which instance is down, and we also need to reassign uh, all the application ID that are assigned to this instance. So that would not work very well with this first option. So I would say like failure handling might not work, because that would increase the responsibility on the web server, because it will have to continuously monitor health of the another service. And also in case it goes down, it has to reassign all the responsibility to another service instance. So maybe second option that I can think of is having a separate service that takes this responsibility of having like monitoring health of the monitoring services. Then it can have all the mappings for monitoring service instance and application. And in case of failure, it can like perform the failover and assign all the failed matrix services application to another service instance.
Okay.
Um,
Makes
yeah,
sense.
so I'm thinking the second option would be better, since it kind of separates the responsibility like from the web server, and it is dedicated to monitoring health of this monitoring server, and also like perform failovers.
Okay.
So we can say that just monitoring management. Okay, let me just make some space here.
So one question.
Hmm.
Your you designed the system. Now you have a monitoring system that fetches data from the application.
Hmm.
And what does it do after that?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So let's say this monitoring services monitoring matrix of this application, and in case so it will periodically, let's say every one minute or few seconds, based on what kind of SLA we want to provide to our clients. It will poll the metrics from this application. So let's take an example of maybe CPU usage. So this monitoring service will continuously poll for a CPU usage for this application, and every minute it will update uh, update the new value that it found for the CPU usage metric. So this metric will also have the mapping of like it will also have data from the DB containing what is the threshold for this metric. So it will check if the threshold has breached. If it is, then it will also it will update the notification service with all the necessary detail to who to notify to, and it will also update the database.
Okay, two
Um,
questions before you go.
yeah.
You mentioned that the monitoring service will know. Okay, let's come to second first. What happens when you
Mhm.
update DB, that DB call failed?
Oh, you see, so that it failed to perform in the DB, like
It
the,
tried to insert or update, in this case, the metrics DB, um, and insert a row with that
Mhm.
exact schema, but it failed to update because of some network issue or the DB is not available. That call to insert a row failed. What do you do now?
Got it. Yeah, so in that scenario, we still first we need to know that our DB update was successful or not. So we can wait for a response. If we don't get a response in certain amount of time, we can assume that the insertion has failed. So two things we can uh, n- well, one thing we can do here is have a retry in monitoring service. So let's talk about like handling failures. So first is like DB update failed. So one thing we can do is have a retry. Let's say even if this retry did not succeed, uh, so once scenario it could happen is maybe the DB itself is down, right? In that case, the load balancer will know that this DB is not healthy. And yeah, I forgot to mention this, but the primary DB will also periodically keep the secondary DB updated. So in case load balancer finds that the DB itself is not healthy, then it can route all the new requests to the secondary DB.
But the monitoring system is not going to the load balancer, right? I thought the monitoring system is directly inserting into the DB.
Oh, no, it is going through load balancer. Sorry, this diagram is a bit messy.
Okay. So
Yeah.
monitoring system sends the data to the load balancer. Load balancer. So what happens if the load balancer dies or something? Like now you
Yeah,
the failure is a load balancer.
right. Yeah. So one thing we could do is have like we can have multiple load balancers. That is one way of dealing with it. Another would be we can yeah, I can. Yeah, I was thinking about like having a backup of load balancer somewhere in the DB or itself, but that might make things more complicated. So we can have like secondary load balancer that could take over.
So this application is going to scale up. So
Mhm.
all this data insertion into the DB synchronously, and then you are sending the notification.
No, so we will send the notification first, since we want to guarantee like a near real time latency for notification.
Hmm.
Uh, DB updates can take longer and we don't want to wait for the update. We already know that the threshold has been breached, right? So first we can send the notification to maintain that SLA of near real time and then make an update to the DB.
So
Uh,
sorry to interrupt you. Just wanted to know the monitoring service. What does it do
mhm.
first? It fetches the metric information, threshold information from the metric DB, and then pulls the data so that it knows the threshold. Or
Yeah, so
and then finds out the threshold difference.
got it. So what I had in mind was the monitoring metric will fetch all the data about the application and the metrics. For that application, we need to observe based on which service instance will monitor which application. It will forward that data to these monitoring services. And then this service will periodically check for all those application that has been assigned to this service and poll for the metrics.
So
Does
this
that answer your question?
so it is keeping the metrics information in memory for the metric service.
Right.
Okay. I would still
Yeah.
feel uncomfortable with this write heavy system directly going to the load balancer. Load balancer deciding that if I'm not there, then my secondary load balancer will take care of it. Uh, is there a way that we can make sure there is some other way of retrying, or at least a way that things can be added to the DB later, but a notification being sent?
Um, yeah, one thing. So another option is rather than the monitoring this management service go through the load balancer, it can directly talk to the DB. But one disadvantage of that I can see is then the monitoring service would not know like which DB instance is primary at the moment and
Mhm,
whether it is healthy or not.
mhm.
Um, that is why I thought having a load balancer would help so that that part of responsibility is separated from this service.
Okay,
Um,
makes sense. So if I have like, for example, 100 metrics, and this monitoring system will just insert all these metrics into this metrics table, and this monitoring service will scan this one table with all the metrics information to determine like which is in this threshold value every some window seconds.
right. Yeah. So that part I see is not scalable. One one thought that I have in mind for that is we can. So the monitoring management service can maybe, let's say, every hour it can like scan the DB and get all the data in memory. Um, maybe let's say we can keep a cache here so that we don't have to make a DB call every time to fetch the data.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, so that cache would be, let's say, it will be between the load balancer and the monitoring management service. So yeah, it doesn't need to go to the DB and scan the data every time for that.
So you this
Does
cache
that address your concern?
so this cache will be keeping track of all the data for every window seconds. Is that what you're telling? Like who put
Um,
this cache, and what does this cache contain?
Got it. So yeah, the cache will be updated by the monitoring management service. So let's say we have, for example, X number of application in our DB. So it will first scan all the application and the matrix ID, sorry, all the matrix associated with it. And the cache content will be, let's say, like the application ID and maybe a list of matrix that it needs to observe. So something like a key value store where the key can be the application ID, and this will be the value will be list of matrix. And then we can like we also have to consider that the cache can also become full. So we can have some kind of eviction policy here, maybe LRU. Uh, yeah, LRU would work here. So that there is any entry that has not been used recently, that will be out. But yeah, that we can keep the most like recently used or more recently used application and matrix mapping here. And in addition to this, we also have like each monitoring service instance will also have the mapping of the application and the matrix it need to monitor. So it doesn't need to like call the DB all the time.
Right, right. My question is,
That's
this list of metrics that you mentioned is actually the key value pair for all the application and for all the matrices. So it will be like a copy of the DB.
yeah, it contains like part of the DB that is used more frequently.
And who evicts it?
The eviction could be based on LRU. So I'm assuming the cache will take care of the eviction based on the policy we set. So for
But
example, if the
it's a metric, so there's no LRU. Like I want to see the metrics, right? Like what is an LRU for a metric?
no, it's a eviction policy that I'm talking about. So let's say if the cache is full, but we need to, in that case, if we want to make new entry into cache, we need to also delete some of the entries from the cache. And I was saying the least recently used policy could be the one we could use for that. Did you have like a different question?
Yes, I had two things just to clarify,
Mm-hmm.
and this will be the last question I have. This LRU, this cache that you're having, from my understanding of what you told, will be a copy of the DB.
Right.
And it will have the application ID and the list of metrics. How much copy of the DB I did not get, and B, this metrics will be used in real time by applications. So I am like somebody's like constantly monitoring this metrics, and that's where I don't understand this LRU policy, least recently used policy, because every application ID is being monitored.
Right. Yeah, that's a fair point. The reason I thought of LRU, my thought process behind that was that like if we need to make a call to DB, and if we need to delete something from the this let's say like cache, we could use LRU. Maybe the like thought behind that was maybe some application needs to be frequently monitored than the others, and based on that, I thought like LRU would be more usable there.
No, that's not in the requirement also, that some applications will be more monitored, or some metrics is more heavily monitored than the others. It's the metric. It's a anybody who's able to get the metric will be able to view the metric.
Yeah, you're right. I should have called that out or clarified that.
Okay, I think we are at time. Asim, do you want to take over or?
Yeah, thank you for doing this. Thank you, Hetal. Thank you, Sreeprasd. So I will open the floor for the audience. They can now chime in, ask for clarifying questions, or give their feedback to Hetal. And Hetal, would you also keep the screen sharing on, so in case we can go back and forth?
Yeah, and feedback for me is also welcome.
Hey, this is Vivek. Just a quick recommendation. Let's probably spend like 5 or 10 minutes just discussing the solution itself. And if people had questions, I know there's a bunch of chat that we had on the chat around what could we do better and things like that. So maybe let's have like a 5-10 minute discussion on just that aspect of it. And then we can switch to the feedback. So let's keep the feedback away in terms of hold the feedback for now. Let's just do a system discussion, and then we can get to the feedback.
Yeah, one another thing I was thinking that like we don't hear from the interviewer first. Like then maybe we should chime in and other people should chime in.
Yeah, I'll walk through the process for that one. So let's actually do the design discussion first, and then let's not talk about feedback at this point of time.
So there are, I mean, the way I was thinking about this is we define it into two parts. One is some sort of an ingestion system, and one is some sort of a monitoring system. So the interviewee correctly defined the load balancer web server. It goes into the database. What I'm missing here is some sort of like right now there is only one database that accepts like all of the metrics. So I would have some sort of another table that defines what the metrics that I'm looking for, and another DB just for getting the key value pair for the metrics that I'm ingesting from different applications. That's one. Two, there is no queue here. Somewhere I thought like we should have some sort of a way to queue it so that that's why I was asking about retries and all. Some sort of a way so that I can, because if this is a distributed application, I cannot rely on like hitting the database every time or hitting the web server every time without any kind of error that is taking place. That's two. Sharding the database based on, say, metric name. I want to have all my CPUs go into one database. I want to have all my unhacked messages go to another database. That would allow me to scale independently. Right now, it's just one database, which I think the monitoring system needs to scan everything. And that could be like a window also. There should be definitely a created time or an updated time, at least a created time so that I can see in a window, like when I'm going above and beyond certain threshold. Add some space to the diagram. Right now, if I read this diagram, if I have some doubt and if I come back, it's all over the place. So I would recommend to have space between. Take a simple one, complete it, and move on to the next one, but add some space so that you have some wriggle room in case you want to add something more into it. High level, I would say.
Sri, I think I just want to make sure that I want to engage the audience as well. I know you're talking about like the ideal design that you're looking for. So let's hold on to that thought for a minute. Anybody else from the audience? I know there was like one question or one comment saying considering stream. Can we do real-time analysis using tumbling or sliding window? Was one of the comments. Folks, feel free to unmute and share your opinion as well. So Sreeprasd, just wait for a minute, and I think we'll get into that aspect of it in a second. Going once, going twice.
Yeah.
All right, go on.
So I want to like reiterate the problem, and then maybe let's understand then like how we will build it. So basically, I have never seen that the metrics are emitted as a key value pair. Generally, they are multi-dimension metrics. So like let me give you an example. So let's say if I want to emit CPU usage, right? So in my code, like the metric would be emitted as this is the environment, this is the tenant, this is the machine, this is the process, and this was the CPU usage, right? And then CPU usage is my metric. So basically for this column value environment test, for this tenant, maybe SD skills, for this machine M1, this process, this was the CPU usage. So somehow like there will be so many processes running in a distributed system, and all of them will be emitting this metric CPU usage, right? So that is one ingestion part, that how so many processes will be emitting different metrics and all those things. So how will you scale it so that they could be stored in the database? Now, once this information is stored in the database, the other thing is how you create monitors. So to create monitors, in these kind of metrics, you generally create pre-aggregate. So what is the meaning of pre-aggregate is, so let's say all of your processes are emitting CPU usage. So that CPU usage of so many processes is maybe not so helpful to you. You want to aggregate them for some particular dimension. So let's say you are aggregating them in the environment level. So at environment level, you are taking the maybe the average of CPU usage, And then you are saying that if average or if these many machines are over that much CPU usage, so your pre-aggregate is taking the count that how many machines in a particular environment are above that CPU usage. And if that many machines are above, then you create a monitor. So for that, you will be running some kind of stream processing on your database, which will be counting whatever pre-aggregate you have defined. So it will be calculating your pre-aggregate so that your system is near real time. And then on that pre-aggregate, then you can create the monitors.
Awesome. Thanks, Abhishek. Anybody else with any other concerns or questions or follow-ups?
And yeah, I also agree with Abhishek. That's what I thought the system could be built in. That the systems would make their metrics, and then there would be another system who would be doing some kind of aggregations and getting the alarms or something like that. So, and even I think we did one session a while back. I can find the recording and put it in the chat, but we did something similar where the systems would send metrics and then we would try to aggregate and even do like this top A hitters thing, like how much top frequency things are coming.
So I would like to add in here that, just for everyone's information, like in such kind of questions, like we should be clear of that for metrics, there are basically 2 to 3 type of metrics. One is the system metrics, and then we have the application level metrics, right? And then for the application level metrics, it can be like the user activity or the business logic side, correct? Like what is the application doing internally, whether all the SLAs are being met or not, right? That kind of a metric. But then it was clearly mentioned in the question that this is related to the system metric. So that's fine. I mean, like, the interviewer already cleared it out. Then for system metric, like we already have it in our organization. So from my previous experience, what I feel is he clearly mentioned it out that, it has to be an ingestion system and the monitoring system. So for ingestion system, it has to be some kind of an application which keeps ingesting it. And then yes, a queue should be there in between. And for monitoring, this is a separate application which has 2 options. Either it analyzes the data from DB, or when we ingest it, we ingest the data in the database. Along with that, we fan out this data to this monitoring application so that it can analyze it in real time. So the application which we are using in our organization is called as capacitor. What capacitor does is it runs in 2 mode, either a live mode, a stream mode, or a batch mode. So in the batch mode, the database we are using is InfluxDB. So InfluxDB doesn't push the data; it gives it the metrics. Whereas in the live mode, it as it is copies the data in capacitor's underlying database so that it can analyze the data at runtime. And then all the monitoring alerts, the thresholds, everything that is taken care by capacitor. So all those threshold values we are inserting in capacitor. Other thing can be, we do have a dashboard system also using Grafana. So queries can be written in Grafana also. And then alerts can be raised from Grafana. So raising alerts, like it can be done from 2 systems. One is the monitoring system can do it, or it can be done from the dashboard system.
Nice. Thanks, AJ. Namita, I think you unmuted. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I wanted to add to, actually ask a question to Abhishek on the aggregation and the alarming, basically notifying the system. He mentioned that we can use like stream processing, that whenever we insert database, like things in the database, and then we, based on the value, we can get like near real-time alerts. So how do we scale that streaming process when we have like 100K requests, that even if after batching we are putting like 100K requests in the DB, where you have a lot of metrics that are coming in your DB. So how do we that near real-time system? Can we talk more about that? I'm a little more interested in knowing how he was thinking about scaling that streaming part.
Yeah, so I don't have a perfect solution, but what comes to my mind is that so there will be multiple stream processors running, and basically you can divide the load based on whatever metric you are streaming on. So basically, let's say you are creating a pre-aggregate on CPU usage, right? So that task can be given to a separate stream processor, which can take its own time to process. So it will be near real time. So basically, what happens is like you are storing your initial data somewhere, right? So that data will be giving you change feed, that whatever new rows are being added to that data, and that change feed will be stored in some queue or something. Then that stream processor will read from that queue, and then it will aggregate that data, and whatever is the aggregation, then it will store in some other database that materialized view or that aggregated data, right? So so basically those queues and streams we could have different for different metrics. That's how we can distribute it. And like even if the load is very high, so the queue can buffer it, and then like when we have enough capacity, then that data could be aggregated, and then those results could be emitted. So that's why like sometimes in these systems we might see that we might not have very latest data, and we have maybe 2 or 3 minutes old data, and that could very well happen.
Got it. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I would like to add one thing, right? So in this, this is Praveen. So basically this monitoring system, right? So there's, as someone, Asim or someone mentioned, like there are two aspects of it. One is how you store the data so that it can easily be accessed, because not everything that you process it will be used, correct? So you should not be thinking about aggregating everything. At the same time, if there are some front-end dashboards or reports that are there, only they need to be aggregated and shown. So you should primarily consider how to collect all the data and store it in a place where it can be easily be retrieved. Because if you take example of App Dynamics or Splunk, right? So it collects all the data, but only when people query it, that's when you're going to see the data out. And when you're querying it, there may be Prometheus or there may be Grafana or other front-end applications, which will do the hard work. All you have to do is get the time series database, data in the form of time series, so it can be sliced and diced for future use. So our primary use should be just store everything in using Promulgator or something to just collect all the information and keep it ready for front end to use.
Awesome. Thanks, Praveen.
Yeah.
We probably have time for one more. Anybody else with any other comments? Otherwise, we can switch to the feedback mode.
I have one more thing to add. So in the ingestion system, what we could also have talked about is, rather than the application directly sending the data, we could also have like an async process that is running on the server and reading from another log that is sending this out. So it does not really hamper the actual production traffic. So that is another thing maybe we could add into the system.
AJ, do you want to react to that?
Yeah, I think like we already mentioned like in the starting that we want a queue for that, for this async ingestion, right?
Yeah, but even to send it to the queue, I was thinking another process that is running that is sending to the queue. That's what I meant.
So Namita, are you saying that instead of application like making a request to send the data, it will be maybe storing those metrics locally, and then some other process will be picking those metrics by reading from the disk and then sending it over the network to the system? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I meant.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It has both pros and cons. Like what happens if that server fails, the application fails, then that data that you stored somewhere is gone. Two, every application server now needs to have some sort of a worker or some sort of a service internally, which runs and knows like what metrics to be collected and where it should be stored. And that storing space should be common across all the applications. These are additional overheads.
So
True.
at least
Yeah, true. But the reason that I was thinking about the async process is like the server can just keep doing what like keep serving the traffic for the actual application, and this logging slash monitoring can be treated differently. So the application is not waiting to do its own job before it actually publishes the matrix.
Correct. All I'm saying is that now if I spin up a new application and it needs to know that, okay, I have to collect all these existing CPU and other metrics and allow some other process to like internally run. And that will have more memory than it would otherwise not require. And B, if that application dies off in between, then those logs are like virtually non-existent. I mean, both has got, like I said, pros and cons.
yeah, but from customer point of view, like then adding each metric will add some cost because your system is doing it synchronously, right? So like your overall service might have slower response. So instead of that, like at least in logging systems, I don't know about in metric system, in logging system, I have seen that the general trend is to log locally to the disk and then some other process running and then taking those logs from the local and then publishing to the server. I don't know about the real-time metrics, but at least for logs, that's the way how it's done.
Nice, great discussion. So let's actually, I think this is good. Quite a lot of details. I think there is. I'm sure. I think Asim, if you're taking note of this, it looks like this could be one of the system design discussions we may be able to run and have a lot more. We can pick this apart and discuss. I think a similar conversation had already happened, but it's probably even worth rerunning in some of these cases. So with that, let's actually switch to feedback. And the way I think I'd love to do feedback, it's always helpful, is maybe like the candidate should go first, like do a self introspection on areas where you think you did well and areas where you think you could have improved. Let's start with that. And is there someone who's taking notes? Like us,
You guys stepped out and I was not able to write now notes. Probably I'll be back to my system in 5-10 minutes.
That's okay. That is fantastic. So that's fine. Thank you, Asim. Let me I'll take the notes as we go. So go ahead. You have the mic. So how do you think you did in terms of the interview, and what are the areas you think you did well, and what areas you think you could have done better if you had a chance to redo? Go for it.
Yeah, I think I like started off well, like defining requirements, but like as I went more deeper into the design, I realized I should have clarified more things, like discussed what like example metrics would look like, spend more time on how we want to collect the metrics. So I think that's the part I would like to improve on. Another thing that I saw I missed is talking about scaling the DB part, maybe how we store the database in terms of like how would we do sharding and partitioning, as Sreeprasd mentioned. Yeah, so those are some of the main things that I noticed.
Awesome. Thank you for that. First of all, thank you for stepping up for the interview. I know it's hard to do that in front of a reasonably large audience. I think we have 50 plus members here. We had 56 at one count. So thank you for doing that. And one of the areas that I generally try to focus on when we look at this is that, we talk about requirements gathering, high level problem solving, like did you solve the problem? Low level design, like did you take care of all the lower level items, and then system verification, did you do the verification? So in terms of these 4 areas, do you think you were able to sufficiently cover all the 4?
No, I think I kind of ran out of time. I should have yeah, I need to do some time management here, because I also wanted to spend time on discussing what are the pros of this design that I didn't get to, and I realized I'm out of time by the time I was like done discussing this.
Got it. Thank you so much. So I want to throw the floor open to the audience to see if there are any specific comments they had, not on the system design itself. I think we just had the technical conversation, but I wanted to talk about like the process that was employed here, like in terms of requirements gathering, problem solving, and low level design and system verification. So anyone with any comments?
Hey, I have a question, like how much time candidates should spend on requirements gathering?
Sri, do you have an answer for that, Sri Prasad?
I usually share some like 5-10 minutes in the beginning to make sure, because the whole interview is based on what you initially write down as the requirements. So if you get the requirements incorrectly, it is wrong. So how much ever time you require for understanding the question, clarifying your assumptions, that is what I would recommend. Usually that time I have seen is like around 5-10 minutes. That is what I have seen. It's not like a fixed number, I would say. Like time as in like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It depends on the question, but usually 5-10 minutes.
I think Praveen's comment on the chat was that I felt the initial requirement gathering was over time. I assume that it meant you spent more time on gathering the requirements, Hetal.
So,
All right. Go ahead, Asim.
So, Hetal, I can tell you what I felt, and there is always room for improvement and things you did well and how you can take this to the next level. I won't go too much into technical things, but overall, I felt you followed the structure, you have the flow. Now we have to compact it into smaller time frames. So, for example, the requirement gathering should be take less time, the high level should take less time, and other things. And what I felt, this only comes with practice. There's no other way. What I have seen in for me in the past, there's no other way. Even when I was doing initially, I used to take like 1.5 hour doing a thing, but with practice, I made it 1 hour and then 45 minutes, and then like it will become a natural flow for you the more you practice or the more you do. And I think you have already felt it today. Like if you have to do this thing next time, you know where we are missing things and how you can compact the things. I'm definitely sure you might have got that feeling already, like how you can do, and that could be subconscious also. Like next time you will do it in a different and a much better way. And I felt like you can think about the tool you are choosing. That is also important, because I feel personally like bringing these boxes up and down and writing take time. I generally suggest people to have a free OneNote or something where they can randomly draw, and that saves time. You don't need to go back and forth and bringing thing and make it really organized. And then with tools like OneNote, you have a kind of a pan. You can go up, left, right, bottom, up, and you have a lot of landscape there to draw things. But only catch there is, again, you might need a practice to work on drawing thing and writing like a freehand, and you might need a stylus pen or something like that. But if you do practice, I felt like that is much more smoother than drawing boxes. But if you're comfortable and you can say it, like you can pick up more speed on that, then absolutely fine with that. But overall, I think you have a good flow. Only now we need more practice and bring it like under the whole thing what we did, like we need to bring it under 40 minutes or 35 minutes. That's it.
Got it. Yeah, thanks. That's really useful. I haven't explored other tools, but yeah, I'll explore the tools that you mentioned. And yeah, I agree. I definitely need more practice.
So what I did, I explored all the tools. I started with sharing my showing, opening my camera, doing a whiteboarding. That was fine. but the problem there is that I have limited visibility on my camera. I can't go really back and forth. Then I thought of like similar tool what you did, AW apps or something. Then I settled down on OneNote where I felt okay, I can draw there also, I can bring boxes also there, I can do calculations there also. OneNote gives like basic calculations, and then even I like whatever I want, I can do things. And then I can choose different pens also, blue, white, something like that, which I feel. So explore more tools and find the best tool for you.
Yeah, sure, will do.
And keep on practicing. That's all, like, because things are different now. It's not the same like we used to go in person and do whiteboarding, and there would be really big whiteboard and your interviewer would be in front of you. So we need to fix out what tool, and then if you are in a real interview, your camera would be on. And also make sure like how you make eye contact with your interviewer, because with body language also you can see things, what is the expression of the interview, like whether I'm making a right assumption or interviewer saying no, or like that also helps, like how you see the body language of the other person.
Right.
Awesome. Thanks, Asim. Anybody else with any other piece of feedback, and then we can go to Sreeprasd after that for the interviewer's perspective. Just 1 second before last chance for anyone to chime in with their specific comments. All right, Sri, on to you. Go ahead. MM.
Sorry. One quick thing that I would like to ask audience here is that, I mean, I guess the interview itself is like it's all about practice and what decision that we make in that 45 minutes. So, but I always struggle to sometimes what happens is we start with the problem, right? So we write the technical requirement, functional, non-functional, and then we get the sense of what this interview looks like, or in which area that I should be, getting into more deeper by asking questions to interviewer. But then sometimes what I felt is that if we start with the system design, like as architecture diagram, I felt that suddenly becomes so rabbit hole that we just talk about, architecture diagram and what blocks goes to where and things like that. So I was looking to get some feedback in general, is this the flow should be, or is this something we should think about, solving this problem as if like this is not a distributed system, and how will I solve this as a locally, and see whether that if I get the buy-in from interviewer, and then naturally, progress towards building this as a distributed system. But then sometimes I feel like I feel like in that case I have to also check with an interviewer whether he or she wants me to focus on specifically on the database schema design, or whether I should be designing an API. So there are so many components into that, right? So I want to ask the audience or experienced people here, is that what is a natural flow should be in this case. I mean, that's what another thing that I'm always struggle, because the time and practice makes us good, but I'm just trying to understand the flow sometimes. And it also depends on the problem too, actually, sometimes, because the problem is pretty huge and it says distributed world, then what's the point of solving this problem locally? Why not just solving it distributed to begin with? So I'm just looking to get some answer as well.
That's a great question. Anyone here who wants to take the stab at answering that? I can give it a shot. So I think my general approach and advice is that try to keep it simple and try to make it design iterative, just like how you would code things. You would want to make sure that the end-to-end flow is always satisfied at any point of time. So you may want to just define the APIs and make sure that the APIs are solved without bringing in like a load balancer, the web servers, and even separation of the web DB layer. You don't even need that. That's a part of your high level understanding of what the system looks like. Then you can just call that out. And then as the interview proceeds, you would be breaking it into smaller things. I mean, you wouldn't want to introduce like a caching layer before it is actually required. You wouldn't want to introduce like a load balancer till it comes to that. Should your DB be resilient, or should you add more items to that? I mean, the resiliency can be a logical construct, right? And you could say that this is like a resilient DB block, and that's about it. Then if somebody wants to talk about the resiliency, then sure, we can spend the entire next like 30 minutes discussing about how this is resilient and what goes into it. So I think the idea of actually doing it in the high level, if you remember the 4 blocks that I was talking about, would be requirements gathering, where you talk about end-to-end requirements. Then you have a high level design, a low level design, and then the verification. The high level design would happen in iterations so that you can, I actually like how you put it, saying you should do it like, how would I solve this locally, or in a like in a distributed part. Because once you start adding distributed computing layers, like you're adding queuing mechanisms, you're adding caching mechanisms, you're adding scaling mechanisms, I think the system becomes way too complicated and it just becomes pretty hard to comprehend. And I think it's just the way you, I think I like the way you put it, just like rabbit holes the conversation into so many different things that you may not even end up discussing the crux of what you wanted to. Great question, MM. I don't know if that answered it for you.
No, I think to be honest, this is something that I felt too as well. Like even in the real interview, I feel like, man, I know everything. And now when I start solving the problem, and where the problem is open-ended, right? And in real interview, that's what it happens, right? In this case, Sreeprasd was very nice that he was trying to get into where exactly he wanted to drive this whole discussion. But sometimes everything is open-ended. And if I start with something that is open-ended, I felt like struggle, like where do I, because I mean, I think there's a 2 aspect, right? The breadth and deep, right? So sometimes it's very hard to balance which one to which direction to go in real interviews. So that's why I always felt like, what should be the right guidance from the interview point of view. But I think yeah, I think that I just wanted to call out. So thank you.
Great, Praveen, go ahead. Go ahead, Praveen. I saw you unmute. Go for it.
Yeah. So I have one feedback is when you give that breadth versus depth, right? So most of the times it's up to the interviewer to see, once he feels that he knows the candidate is good with that area, then he can just say, okay, I'm good. Just rat hole on how the data is stored, whether images versus logs versus why only one database. If you're focusing on only database, you can say, what about user credentials? What about other credentials, right? You can just rat hole on one thing. But in general, it's all up to the interviewer how which area he wants to focus. And also for the interviewee, right? On a high level, if you can give a full breadth immediately, and then keep asking the interviewer, like, which area you want me to focus on, so that I can, draw more boxes there or give more details there. Like for here, right? Data should be accurate. At the same time, it doesn't need to be immediate, right? Eventual consistency is the key here. So it may be 5 minutes late or 2 minutes late, but eventually everything should be, no log should be lost, right? Monitoring. So then that can be one of the key metrics of eventual consistency, and how you are going to achieve that. How is the data protected, and you can just go deep into that functional requirement. Thank you.
Yep. Totally makes sense, Ryan. MM, go ahead.
No, I think that is what I was going to say, is that because in this SD skill forum, because not everybody has the same level of experience and knowledge in the specific domain. So everybody has like people who are like few years of experience, and there are people who are here is like about 10 years of experience too. So that's why, I don't know how this process works, but is that something you guys see, that person who is an interviewer are, you get to see like what is the experience of that person is, and based on that you decide the question, or what is the expectation here? Because if you just talk about this, and if you bring this question to, let's say, people who are 20 years of experience, which is the 4 years of experience, the whole perspective is going to be different, right? So how do we judge it, and how do we, and more importantly, as an interviewee, right, an interviewer in this case, what learning the lesson that he or she can get out of this is very important based on the role that he or she applying. So I'm just trying to ask this question to get the sense.
Got it. I will let Sri answer this, because he was the one who designed the question. There are also 2 more questions for you, Sri, on the chat. One was saying, would it be better to solve the question for a single machine before making it distributed? And would the question be any different if you did it for system metrics versus application metrics? So go for it. It's all yours, Sri.
Yeah. So one thing which I wanted to mention earlier, I don't know who, but somebody said about first a high level design and then a low level design. Like it's very subjective. Like I have seen interviews who have done very well just with one design, just from start to end, like one design and making it scalable. I've also understood where interviewer asks my question, and then the interviewee designs first a system for like one single server, and then extend it to make it more scalable with multi-server. So I genuinely don't know whether there is one correct answer to say whether should I go with the single machine first or should I go with the distributed system first. As long as you can have a system which is scalable, which you can explain in that time frame of 40 to 45 minutes, that should be fine. I know it's a very vague answer, but that's what I have seen practically whenever I have interviewed. There is no one right answer to say should I go with. Sometimes you go with one single machine and you go into the weeds of it, and then you don't have time to explain it to what happens if it becomes scalable. And sometimes it's the other way around. So it depends on how much you can complete in that 45 minutes explaining it. And there is no like, should I do the low level first and high level first and then the other way around? That's what I have seen practically. Second question was, would the design be any different if the metrics are system metrics versus? So these are internal applications. The way system metrics and application metrics, somebody has to pull the metrics and then decide what to do with it. I didn't see any difference between both from my point of view. What was the third question, or did you have no third question?
No, I think you answered both of them. So the other aspect of the question was around single machine versus multi-machine. I think you covered that aspect of it. So why don't we do this in the interest of time? Sri, do you want to just go and provide your interview feedback, and then we can bring it all together. Go for it.
First of all, like, thank you for stepping up. Like, that is a very it's a very difficult thing to do, to talk in front of a lot of people. So thank you for stepping up. In terms of interview, I think you did well. Just that I got confused at towards the end, like there are so many diagrams, and I could not see end-to-end flow how you're going to monitor. That was one thing. Second, I think you could have done little differently in terms of like you were spending too much time on one part where your client would add metrics to the DB, and it's basically a CRUD operation for adding a metric and defining the metric. And then the later part was ingestion, and I did mention let's come to the ingestion part. That's where I would say you could have spent more time. So at a high level, I would say while designing, what I would be looking for is there a single point of failure in the system? Somewhere that system, like in this case, initially there was one monitoring service, I think, which does a bunch of things. What happens if that fails? So that's where I would look for. As an interviewee, I would ask you to do that instead of the interviewer pointing that out. Use of queues. There are some places where you need queues. There are some places where you do not need queues. Usually for async purposes, you would need queues. For scalability, I would say you would need queues. When you say DB, you put everything in one DB. That would be difficult even for one monitoring service to go through all the records in the queue to identify even if there is a threshold boundary jump. So define your database in such a way that you can shard and partition it. And then you can talk about how do I partition it? By what key I'm partitioning it? What happens if this service fails? You mentioned about monitoring service. What happens if the service fails? Then you mentioned monitoring service will know. Yeah, another thing is when you say a service will invoke another service, also mention how does it know to invoke this monitoring service. You did not need a application DB to get that information about which application to which metric. All you needed was a metric definition, and you can use your service discovery to identify which all services are there and determine like if this metric is valuable or not. that you can just abstract it out and say, okay, I'm going to use a service discovery where I'll know all the new application that got registered, and I'll see whether I need to apply this metrics or not. Because if I'm adding a new service, now your responsibility in this case is on the actor, or in this case the client, to know that a new service has come and then add it to this application DB, so that this metrics, for example, if it's a CPU metrics, almost all new services I'm going to add would need a CPU metrics. So now you're putting this responsibility on this actor to know that a new service has come, and if he forgets it, I wouldn't get that metric. So that part you could have abstracted out. So know when you can just abstract and say, okay, I'm going to use a service discovery or somebody to know where I'm going to get that information to connect to. Pushing the data whereas pulling the data. Earlier, somebody also mentioned about this. It depends on the application. I feel in this application, because you know which metrics I'm going to pull, it's better for the application monitoring service to pull the data. It's a single point of failure for monitoring service, but at least if the application fails to respond, I will know immediately. I do not need to put the data immediately into the DB. I can have some sort of a cache in the monitoring service, some sort of a Redis or something, and then another service can fetch the data and insert it into the DB via some queue or something. Internally, another service can aggregate or do this monitoring. Or somebody also mentioned about capacitor or something. That's also a fairly decent design. When you insert the data, also determine how you are querying the data. Initially, you did not mention about the metric name. You only had a metric ID, an application ID, and a metric. As a user, at the end, if I want to search for a metric, now I would be requiring to know the metric ID. And because there is only one database, one table here, my metric ID will keep on increasing for every record that is coming in. So I don't know how to query the data for. So think about how I can query the data. That part would help you. And the last part is about testing and monitoring that I would usually recommend, but this isn't a testing and monitoring system itself. So just leave that part out. But that's what I would say, that these are things that you should think about while designing such a system. That's my feedback.
Got it. Yeah. Thanks for all the feedback, Sreeprasd. It's very helpful.
Super great. Any follow-up or clarifications on Sreeprasad's questions or comments from anyone?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to explore was scaling the DB part. Sreeprasd, you mentioned like we should define partitions and sharding for it. Was there anything more to it? Like how should we optimize the scanning the tables for getting the metrics?
So two ways I was thinking. One is at the time of ingestion, or after the ingestion from the DB, you scan the entire DB. If you're going with scanning the DB after the ingestion, then you should definitely, otherwise also you should like partition the data so that anybody else can like look at the DB later on. I would recommend, like if I were to design it, I would have told, okay, let me do it by the metric name or the environment or something like that. Some sort of a DB where I can do key value pair, maybe Cassandra or some other non-relational DB. That's what I would think for if I'm doing it like like post ingestion and then I'm scanning it. Another way I was thinking of is some sort of a streaming system which emits because all I need to know is whether I'm above or below. So while inserting the DB, if it is above or below, then you send a via queue or something an event that somebody can listen to. And if it's beyond a certain window, it emits a metric to the alerting system. It calls the alerting system for the notification. That is the two different ways I was thinking of alerting and storing the data.
Okay, yeah, thanks for explaining.
I had a question for Sreeprasd. He mentioned service discovery in the monitoring system. Can you talk a little bit more about how that would work, or point to some article or blog or company that is using service discovery like that?
So the reason why I mentioned about service discovery was, in this case, once the client sets the metric, any application who's coming up, it would need if the metrics matches whatever the application is spinning up, like for example, CPU usage, almost every application would require a CPU usage monitoring. So for that, I don't need to know whichever service is coming and is getting destroyed. If a service discovery was there, I would just look at the service discovery, determine all the services that I need to ping for or determine for that metric, and then use that because service discovery will tell you, okay, this is the service, these are the IP addresses for those, and these are all internal applications, so you would definitely get that information. And then use that information to ping or to get the metrics from those IP addresses or those application, and then determine whether it is above or below. That's where the service discovery would come into play. In this design, every application would need to register in this application DB or this table called application DB before something could be measured or monitored. That's what I was thinking. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you. Follow-up question is, can you name a tool that you would use? The service discovery tool.
I don't know. Console is a tool, I feel. Is there any other tool that people can think of? I thought Console is one of the service discovery framework.
Zookeeper.
Zookeeper, yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right. So, any more questions or any more clarifications for Sreeprasd? I saw a few questions on the chat for me. I'm just going to answer those as well. But before we get into that one, Abhishek, why don't you go ahead and
so I wanted to talk about one of the things that talked about, and that was very interesting to me, that like based on the experience of interviewee, like how you should decide the question, basically because I felt this question is very hard. And if I have not worked on any monitoring system, then actually knowing what the metrics are and understanding the problem would have been very hard for me. I saw in chat, most of the people had this question, what is the meaning of metric? So I believe that like knowing the actual experience and maybe asking that, have you worked on any of the monitoring system, would have helped then change your question. So like giving an example of how the questions could have been changed. So this same question, it could be as simple as like if you want to ask a question to a second year computer science engineer that, hey, you have a stream of numbers and how would you get a max out of that, right? So that's a very simple single system problem, that you have a stream of data coming, you want to take the max, you create a heap or something, right? Taking it to a next level, that, hey, like you have a distributed system where a lot of machines are emitting a simple key value pair. Key is let's say CPU usage and metric is value, and you want to give me maximum or average and at any particular time. How would you design a system? So it eliminates all these things, metric and everything, which interview might be like, these all things are a lot of unknowns to him, and it might bring him more confusion. So it simplifies all this. If the then interview is more experienced, much more experienced, then this kind of question would have been good. So that is how I would have done it.
Cool, Abhishek. I think you made a good point. So I want to just add two things there. First, we generally encourage interviewer and candidate to connect with each other before the interview. I don't know if that happens this time, and even I didn't ping any of them to connect, but I generally ping people to connect just before, so they can know each other, so they can set up the expectation and other things. But I also feel on the other way, that's what I've seen. It doesn't matter these days what is the level of experience. If the interviewers come up with a question, they would ask and see how the candidate come up with the different solution. If they see like the candidate is struggling, okay, let's make it little mellow down, make it easy. But these days people don't make assumption. As a 2-year-old experienced person might not know things. So things go, even like let me tell you my experience. Like I have a good experience, and in one of the interview, what they have asked me, URL shortener. So that was like the really basic question to be asked to anybody. So I feel like it doesn't matter like how much experience I had. The interviewer already have something in their mind, and they will go with that.
I would like to clarify. I did not connect with the interviewee earlier before this interview. So I genuinely did not know about any experience about the interviewer. I should have, and next time I would make sure that I'll connect with the interviewee earlier.
Yeah, I also did not connect to the interviewer before this because I thought that's the part of the expectation that so that like you don't have any expectation set on the question that is going to be asked, and like we were trying to mimic the real interview scenarios where yeah you cannot be sure what is going to be asked.
And this is an open forum, and that's what this is a platform where you can pick up a difficult task or an easy task. The only focus area is that to explore things, your strengths, how to do things different, and so in the real interview you would have a better mental model or mindset to deal with the question, and it could be easy, it could be difficult, it could be moderate. I don't care after that, because if I am in that flow where I'm prepping, I'm expecting anything could be asked to me. And it happens, like I've seen like complicated questions to easy questions being asked to the people.
Excellent. Any other comments? Or I can just wrap it up with a quick feedback for both the interviewer and the candidate, and also for the audience. Just going once on any more questions. Looking for people to unmute. All right, hasn't happened. So let me jump in. I think I'm going to echo a lot of what folks said. I'll try to not repeat any of the comments that were there, but I do want to take the time to acknowledge that being an interviewee in this particular setup, answering this question and following up, especially in a live session in front of like 50 plus participants, and also when it's being recorded, is quite intimidating. So thank you so much for doing that. And I think it's that thing that doing this and doing this more often is what builds your confidence. So for everybody else who's in the audience, if you have not signed up to be a candidate, do so. And if you have not signed up to be an interviewer, do that as well, because that being an interviewer actually greatly improves your way of how you break down the question and what to expect and things like that. So by the breakdown that I talked about, I think I'm going to be a little more prescriptive here. I think Sreeprasd, you mentioned that some questions you may actually want to do like a one-phase design versus some you want to do a multi-phase design. I'm going to be more prescriptive here and say that I think that you should always do like the two-step approach. Always have like a simplest version of the working thing available. This is true even for coding questions. Like make sure that you understand the end-to-end setup and scenario, and you have a way of solving it end-to-end where all the pieces are there, but the data flows completely, but it does not have to handle the scale or the specific areas or elements of it. And as the interviewer is, as you're adding more and more layers of complexity, you can just go deeper into that one specific area alone. Otherwise, what ends up happening is that you would cover like a scatter shot, medium depth across the board. And that I think is a suboptimal interview situation to be in. So my personal recommendation based on a bunch of interviews that I've been through is to make sure that you do the two-stage approach for the interview, which is to do a high-level design first, and then the low-level design afterwards. And the high-level design is just basically few blocks, just talking about end-to-end are things like, the data is flowing. Here are the logical blocks and entities and things like that. So just going into this, I want to do a quick takedown of each of the 4 sections for you, Hetal, and then we can talk about Sri's interviewing skills as well. So on the requirement gathering, you did a good job of restating the questions. You wrote down a bunch of requirements. It was actually good. You asked a lot of thoughtful questions, and you got to the quantitative aspects of it as a part of requirements as well. I mean, those were phenomenal. I think it is way better than what I would expect. Now, here is the other shoe is that it was almost like 17 18 minutes passed, and somebody mentioned this in the comments as well, saying and we were still discussing the requirements, and I think I made a question saying like, should we move on? Is it time to go on at this point of time? Because it looked like we were stuck in that requirements loop. It is possible for you to spend like an entire hour, 2 hours, 3 hours on just the requirements and clarification and assumptions. So just make sure that you are spending no more. I think I like Sri's assessment of 5 to 10 minutes on the requirements. Requirements are super critical. Doing them makes sense. but requirements clarification and problem exploration it's very important. I will come back to this in a second for in a different angle. But the next phase of it is the high level problem solving. I am actually amazed at your draw.io, the diagrams foo. I mean, you did a fantastic job of drawing the blocks and keeping it together. Like, this it's like a pretty neat high level design. And I think you kept it in sync. You were moving the boxes appropriately and things like that. I mean, I know Asim said you were wasting a bunch of time doing some of that, and you could have been better if you had used like a OneNote or something. To each their own. I thought your draw.io foo was fantastic. This is not this is much higher skills than what I have seen from a majority of folks. So I mean, fantastic for others. I mean, this is the level and quality you should aspire to be if you're using one of these tools. If you don't have this level of skills, then it will impede your interviewing. I mean, the drawing will come in the way of your interview process, and that will be a problem. So practice a lot, practice on the whiteboard thing. I don't know, Asim, you didn't mention it this time, but using like the touch pen, the Apple Pencil or whatever on an iPad is much better. Using the Surface has the same pen thing, right? So we are all used to doing it on a touch pen or whatever. I think Samsung has this S Pen and whatnot. So using one of those devices might be better, but don't use it for the first time in an interview. Practice very well. This is definitely excellent. And overall design was also very good. I think I had all the big pieces, enough items to dig into and go deeper into. Your trade-off discussions was also fantastic. You talked about failure modes, and then what are the different parts where it could be hotspots, and those discussions are actually nice. One thing on the high level problem solving was that I think you needed the interviewer to prompt on certain parts, and you jumped in. I don't recall the exact place where I noted this down, but you can watch the video again and you will probably see it. You will notice that Sri is helping you a little bit more, even in the basic system design, like the end-to-end part of the story. And that I think is sort of a miss from your side, making sure that you have that covered, like exactly where you're starting from, where you're ending, and you should be guiding the discussion on the high level design. And then you should wait for the interviewer to pick which one you want to go for low level design. So that was good. The part that I did not like was while there are two parts of the low level design. One part of the thing is breaking it down into smaller components and minor things and bigger items, bigger blocks like the load balancer or the DB sharding and things like that. I think those conversations were good. The part I also expect in low level design is the quantitative computing thing about saying how many computers do you need, how many web servers do you need to handle this, what's the size of the DB, and there's some back of the envelope calculation for that. And I don't think we got anywhere near that. Primarily, I think there was time was an issue, but the fact that was missed out, I think low level design in my mind was not very efficient at this point of time. And it didn't give all the signals that I would have wanted from the interview. On the fourth bucket, which is where there was a question about how do you do system verification, I think you did a good job of testing on the fly. Like you were thinking about various pieces, and I think Sreeprasd also did a good job of pointing out like the hotspots and other things as a part of the conversation. So it was very collaborative in that conversation, so it was good. But you didn't have the time to do a full thorough audit in the end to just make sure that all the elements were flowing and the race conditions are being handled and things like that. So usually if you had like a mechanism where you had one system actually pumping in data, another system reading the data and processing it, like you want to make sure that the pumping data happens before the reading of the data. And just walking through some of those scenarios of where there could be deadlocks, walking scenarios of where there could be like a dead machine and replacing them and things like that would be parts of system verification. So that is what I think was overall missing in that activity. But otherwise, I think spot on. I really enjoyed this interview, and I watched the full thing in real time, and I definitely encourage people to go back and watch if you want to get a sense of what those things were. Any questions on the feedback, Hetal?
No, I think that's a really sorry.
Sorry, a quick question, Vivek. I think we brought an excellent point about the capacity calculations, right? Back of the envelope calculations. So those you recommend to do. I've seen many times they are done before even going to high level design. Do you recommend it before high level design or after high level design? When do you recommend to do that? back of the envelope capacity calculations?
In my mind, it's after high-level design. High-level design is just making sure that the functional requirements are met. The performance is a non-functional requirement, and depending on what you want, I might be able to, very commonly, I should be able to scale individual components of my high-level design and satisfy the requirement that you have, unless, of course, you completely change the dynamics of the equation where the reader becomes more hot or the writer becomes more heavy. Then in which case my high-level architecture might not even make sense. I may have to make some tweaks to that. So I would do the quant after high-level design and before low-level design, just to have a quick pass. And then once I'm done with the low-level design, I would again repeat the quant to make sure that I can provide information about what each of the subsystems that I have in my low-level design, or what the scaling should be, like capacity, load, and things like that. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense, because what I've seen, if you do before high-level design, right, you may be doing a bunch of calculations that may not be relevant to the actual problem you're trying to solve, right? So because the bottlenecks, is it the storage, or is it, is it the RPS, right? So I think once you have high-level design, you kind of have a, once you figure out, right, what elements are, like, let's say you're keeping some things in memory, things like that, right? Then you can figure out, okay, how much things I need to keep in memory, how much storage I need. I think at that point, it's maybe more relevant to do the calculation, and you focus only on things that are required instead of trying to do everything and that you don't use later. So from that perspective, it's better to do after high-level design. I agree.
Fair enough. And I think one quick thing, Praveen, before we jump in. Actually, why don't you go ahead and complete this thought, Praveen?
Yeah, I feel like back of the envelope design should be done initially, like at least draft mode, so that when you're creating the big boxes, like depending on, okay, we have like 50,000 users or we have 50 billion users, right? So what is the scale? So based on that, you can design your boxes better initially also. And also you can scale out, and many of the aspects that you're working on, you can actually better estimate and draw if you do back of the envelope initially within the first 15 minutes.
Back of the envelope is actually a little more involved than just understanding the scale. So
yeah,
I would probably do understanding of the scale before the high level, so that my high level is better informed. Then I will do back of the envelope of sorts before my low level design, so that I know which areas to strengthen up. And then I will do like a full on scale calculation about how many computers do I need for specific blocks after my low level design. So that seems to be the general like prescriptive guidance on this one. Yeah. Of course, every question is a little different, so you may actually want to do it indifferently for different things. So,
yeah,
so that makes sense.
Yeah, I want, my point is, when you actually do that, you can get some clarity on some of the metrics and functional requirements also, if you do back of the envelope design early on, so that you can add that to the requirements. But it depends on case to case, as you say, yeah. Whether you want to create a Splunk user system, or whether you want to create a, Facebook kind, or, it depends on the use case.
Yeah, so what I noticed is, like, if you do it before high-level design, right, most of the time you end up not using a bunch of calculation in your design. I think it will end up like wasting time, but rather if you do after high-level design, like as Vivek mentioned, kind of assume some scale and say this is a distributed system we need to scale, and then and keep that in mind to initial design. And then once the design in place, based on the what blocks there, right, then you can focus on the calculations that are relevant to the design. I think that way you're tying the calculus to the design, and then we actually end up like not spending too much time in the calculations.
But in this scenario, we lost, right? We lost doing the back of the envelope design, which is critical. But in the flow, we lost it.
And there were 3 opportunities to do that, and we didn't do that. And we got the low level design complete, but we didn't have the ability to do the design after that, because then there is verification that still needed to be done. So that makes sense. I made a point about race conditions. So I think someone just asked a question, what race condition? Race conditions are not specifically for this question, man. I think the thing that I was talking about is, in general, when you're looking at like a system design where you have the high level design, you will be talking about the data flows, like what happens, who's producing the data, who's consuming the data, where is the data stored, how is the data being pre-processed, how is the data being post-processed, and things like that. So the goal of checking for the race conditions is to make sure that your system is in place so that the producer or the consumer knows that they need to wait for the producers to finish, and the roles and responsibilities are clear. So typically in many of these systems, you will have that you need to have things in place that know that they need to wait for the certain things to happen. And this is a very common setup. And then you also have things like exponential back off and understanding like, rate limits and things like that. So so let me stop there. And I think Asim has posted a pretty good system design reference, like a handout that we had for one of our system design sessions, like early last year. So please take a look at that. That's actually covers a lot of the aspects that we were just talking about. So two little things that I wanted to bring people's attention to was number one is this video will actually get posted on schedule. There is like we have a backlog of videos, so we just get posted in different forms. So for the first time, I'm trying something new. I have shared a Google form both in the chat and it's also there in the Discord as well. Please fill the form up. What we'll do is we'll make the video unlisted and share it with you. We just request that you don't share that outside, just watch it, but please don't share, because we need to do a bunch of things like edit the title, the description, do some trimming of the video to make it work. And then we also add like a cover image and whatnot. If we release the video before doing any of that in any public forum, then the thumbnails get created, and we have it's a super pain for us to kill those and fix it for later. So we generally prefer releasing it after all the clean out is done, but then that's like a pros and cons, right, of early release versus not. So if you're interested in getting an early access to it in an unlisted form, and with Scout's honor, you won't share the video anywhere else, then we will set you up and get you the video sooner rather than later, which should be less than a couple of days, because the Zoom video processes in a day, less than a day, and it takes us like less than a day to upload that. So you should have it in the next couple of days. So that was one. And last,
sorry,
go ahead, Asim.
I need to stop the recording and then we can continue.
No, 1 second. I just need to let me cover Sri's feedback, and then we can stop the recording after that. Then we can continue. All right. So the last thing for Sri, I think amazing job with the interview overall. I think the question is great. I do disagree a little around the complexity of the question. I think the challenge around metrics and gathering of metrics, if the interviewer is not fully versed with what metrics are, then all you can do is just quickly drop it down to saying just do CPU and disk space or something like that, like very simple elementary metrics, and take it into like an infra-like question, and then forget about application metrics. Or you could just make it into an application metrics where you're saying just figure out how many orders were processed or something like that by each of the front-end systems, and just that. So it takes it to a real-world problem as opposed to the like find a maximum in a stream that Abhishek was talking, which is also a fantastic question. The risk you run into with those kinds of simplifications where you're talking in a little bit of abstract is that sometimes it doesn't go into the level of depth that you need. So I think question-wise, great selection of question. Handling-wise, I think you did a good job of keeping the ball rolling, and you were challenging Hetal wherever you felt it was appropriate, and that was actually well done. You were collaborating as a part of the interview process, and you were collecting a tons of data. Your assessment and summary in the end, in terms of providing feedback, was also phenomenal. I think you did a good job of, I felt that you were able to break it down into specific areas and talk about, here are things that you could have done differently and things like that. So I think it's pretty commendable. I think you've done, you understand this question very well, and you also understood where the candidate was coming from and how you were able to help the candidate on certain areas. That was on the good side. Those are all the things that were fantastic. On the constructive side, I think somebody mentioned as well, timing is always a challenge. You are responsible for keeping time. So this is a 45-minute interview. So we want to make sure that you are keeping time, moving, making progress. And if the candidate is spending too much time on the requirements, you could just say, I think we have what we need, make assumptions, and we can move on to the next step. Or if they're not doing enough on the high-level design or something, you can ask a few questions and then help them with the high-level design quickly. And then you can move on to the low-level design. And then if they are not testing the system on their own, then you would prompt them to say what it is. And the way I write my feedback is saying, candidate automatic, tested the system or verified the system on their own, and here is what they did with it. Or I would say that upon prompting, they tested it. And then the third thing would be saying, like, I really had to force them to test the system. They didn't test it at all. So these would be like the 3 grades that I give on testing. And you can have something similar for other areas as well. Like, depending on how much handholding and help you needed to do, you would rate them differently in different areas. One of the objectives is it's never a pass or a fail for the whole interview. It is actually assessment at each of these individual blocks. Like, you could not do requirement clarification well at all, but you can still be successful in the other areas of the interview, because like you could do the high level design, low level design, and the verification, but you just like did a poor job of requirement clarification. That's perfectly possible. Or the other way around, like any section or one or more of the sections could be poorly done. So it's the job of the interviewer to make sure that the candidate is actually not getting stuck in at any point of time in any phase for any longer than necessary. And you need to give them whatever they need with increasing levels of verbosity so that they can understand that. So that would be my feedback for you, Sreeprasad. I think I felt it was phenomenal overall. I think the time management part of it is the only thing that is like a critical feedback for you. But otherwise, everything else is like, on the money or better than average. Super good. Thank you so much. Any comments on my comment?
No,
Yeah, I
thank you.
want to second your feedback as well. This was a really great learning experience for me, because it was collaborative, and also Sreeprasad kind of pointed out some of the cases where it was a single point of failure and things like that. That also made me like learn on how to evolve the system better. So yeah, I just wanted to call that out.
Thank you. Thank you for your feedback.
All right, Asim, I think we can stop the recording at this point, and then we can have an offline discussion and you can stop screen share as well.